This episode is brought to you by Suzy, a cutting-edge market research software platform that empowers some of the biggest companies in the world, like Citibank and Procter & Gamble. To find out more about how Suzy can help you stay competitive, go to tearsheet.co/Suzy. Welcome to the Tearsheet podcast, where we explore financial services together with an eye on technology, innovation, emerging models, and changing expectations. I'm Tearsheet Editor-in-Chief, Zach Miller. And the student debt crisis remains one of America's most pressing financial challenges, with borrowers collectively owing over $1.7 trillion. It's an astronomical number, a number that continues to impact everything from home ownership to retirement savings for millions of Americans. And as both fintech and traditional financial institutions work to develop solutions for this complex problem, we're joined today by Michelle Tran, a veteran of the financial services industry with over 15 years of experience. Michelle is currently head of commercial at Summer and was previously SVP of enterprise sales and strategic partnerships at Vestwell. She's also the founder of NYC Fintech Women and was recently named one of the top 100 women in fintech by Fintech Magazine. Together, we're going to explore how technology is reshaping student debt solutions, what financial institutions are doing to address this crisis, and Michelle's unique perspective on innovation in financial services. Welcome to the podcast, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I'm kind of curious, at Summer, it's a relatively new position for you. I guess you joined within the past year. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep. About 9 months.
Awesome. And so, you're tackling this massive challenge of student debt. I guess kind of what are the unique approaches that you guys are taking to help borrowers that maybe differ from traditional financial services?
Yeah, it's definitely a huge problem. And as you were saying, 1.7 trillion is actually 1.8 trillion now, as the cost of college has gone up. It's quite an issue that most people don't realize that has that long-term impact, right? Like, as you said, impacts to saving for retirement. We help teachers, we help all different employees really figure out how to reduce that student loan payment. And there are many different ways that folks can think about reducing their student loan. And I think as people graduate from college, right now what we're seeing is about 75% of new grads are coming out with around $30,000 on average of debt that is tied to their name. Mm-hmm. And so they're looking at companies to say, hey, companies, how are you helping me? As my first job, are you helping me pay down my debt? Are you helping to match, into my 401k based on what I pay into student loans? Are you helping me get into some of these federal programs that exist today to reduce my debt amount? And so a lot of the trends that we're seeing are like reaching out to their employer and saying, hey, we really need the help. Is this part of a benefit package? And as you can imagine, as a new grad coming out of college, you're really making your next job decision based on, where do you live, how much you make, and that all ties into also the debt that you have.
It's interesting for me because that feels like a societal change. Like, I guess I have some gray hairs in this beard. I mean, it's all gray. But, I wouldn't have thought of reaching out to my employer when I graduated college. Can you talk about how that has changed, how offering different types of, whether it's loan pay down or other fintech services through the employers, to me, that feels like a new model and sort of a new ecosystem that's building around that.
It really is. And I think that's been a big shift over the past several years in terms of really workplace benefits and mm-hmm. the ability for technology to really streamline that process to offer workplace benefits out to employees. So just making it super easy. As you think about benefits generally, it's a little bit of a fragmented concept, right? You have your medical, you have your dental, you have your vision. There's all these different components. So what are these platforms to help bring it all together and make some of these processes really easy? And that's something that my previous employer, Vestwell, was really focused on, was how do we help ensure that there's a great workplace program when it comes to retirement savings, and then bundling in a lot of these other programs as well. And specifically in student debt too, how do we make sure that we're integrated with employer when it comes to, graduates looking? And from an employer perspective, it all comes down typically to recruiting and retention. So they want the best talent. How are they going to offer the best talent a reason to come over if their compensation is, somewhat similar to someone else? So you see that in a lot of the big tech companies too, that they're offering some type of help. You stay there for a year, you're going to get $100 paid into your student loan every month. And these programs are coming up even more so And you typically see them in industries where there's a lot of student loan debt. So you think of like graduate programs, the medical space, as you can imagine, doctors, nurses, vets, they all have a ton of student loans, and there's a really high turnover. So one, how do you bring them into the company? And then how do you keep them? And so these programs, the student loan, they're a really great retention program.
So I guess as you're thinking about targeting, new clients on your end, when you look at employers, are the employers, you mentioned, big employers, tech employers, and obviously companies where new employees are coming over with significant debt. Does that typically mean like these are larger employers, well-funded employers? Like they have to know that this is a tool to use competitively as well, right? So I guess I'm kind of curious how you think of the market.
It is, I think as you get bigger in terms of the employee size, you see more budget given to these type of programs. But we even have we had a private practice call us recently. They only had 20 people under the private practice. And they're like, we want to install this type of program. And so there are a lot of employers who are even on the small end who are interested. But you do tend to see it I would say on the bigger end. And it's a problem that, I think there was a recent survey by SHRM that said, what was it? Over 50% of employees are asking their employers for help, but right now less than 10% are actually offering these student loan programs. And so, and there's a couple different reasons why. Is during COVID there was a payment pause, so you didn't have to. Those that had student loans didn't necessarily have to pay, and that's all changed in the past 6 months. So as of October, if you're not paying into your student loan, you're actually going to get hit on your credit score. Your wages may be garnished, and so there's penalties that are associated, and they didn't exist a few years ago because the government was really trying to help those in need. And so I think this year you're going to see a really big increase of employers beginning to offer it.
The financial industry depends on data, but not all data is created equal. Choosing partners who can separate fleeting trends from groundbreaking innovations is more crucial than ever. If you want to unearth what forces are shaping the industry right now, download our guide at tearsheet.co/Susie. So you essentially had to turn student loan paydown or forgiveness programs into a service that you can offer employers that they in turn can offer to their employees. Like, what were some of the challenges in that process? It seems somewhat novel, that was something you guys chose to do. I'm just kind of curious if there were any technical barriers or, I don't know, were there barriers there?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest reasons why we exist is like we're trying to make it really easy, right? You always have to make it super easy. Any friction, you're like, people aren't going to do it. And one of the biggest programs out there are these federal programs where the federal government will help reduce the debt. Now, we'll see what the new administration does, but these programs exist today. And the problem is, it's like filing your taxes with the IRS directly. Like, I don't know, you've seen these forms, and they're
you can't do it on your own, right?
You can't do it on your own. That's why there's like CPAs, that's why they're TurboTax. So essentially, we're the TurboTax. And so we help, we built the technology to help streamline filling out these forms. Because if people do it themselves, there's a very high percentage, and it's around 92%, where they're going to do it wrong. Either because they just put the wrong number in the wrong bucket or whatever it is. So our technology helps to make sure that these forms are, number one, filled out correctly. But then we also couple it with certified student loan experts who can review all the forms and absolutely make sure that they're correct. Because I think the biggest issue is, if these forms get filled out incorrectly, they get pushed back to, me, the borrower. And I'm like, I don't know why I got rejected. So I guess I'm not eligible. And then I don't do it. And then I still pay the same amount, where it could have just literally been, I put a slash instead of a dash, or I put the wrong number in. And so we're really trying to make sure we're using technology to make it as easy as possible. But then we have, expert people behind the scenes as well.
Do you see other room for opportunities as fintech comes into this whole student debt marketplace? Do you see other room for expansion, other problems to be solved there?
Oh, I think debt in general is a big problem that can be solved.
Easy to accrue it, harder to pay it down, right?
Very easy to accrue. You get credit card offers day in, day out, and
that's where all the innovation went. Yeah.
Exactly. And people are like, yes, we'll sign up, 0% for 12 months. And then you forget, like, then they'll slap on 25% interest after that 12
Mhm.
months. So I do think there's a lot of debt management that can happen. I mean, look, people are still going to use credit cards. People are still going to go into debt, but it's really helping them understand the big impact that it has on kind of future state. And it's kind of crazy because like well we do these Friday call outs called Forgiveness Fridays. So we like
Mhm.
feature a story of someone we helped, and this one story. So we help a lot of teachers through a partnership that we have, and this one teacher we helped. Her comment was, and we were able to get all of her loans forgiven. So there's a special program for public sectors. You work in the public sector for 10 years, you can get all of your loans forgiven.
Wow.
And so this woman, this teacher had $200,000 plus of student loans. And she wrote us and she was like, you don't understand what this means to me. Like I can now think about retiring. I
Wow.
can actually take my kids on vacation. Like the debt issue is a real world issue that I think sometimes we forget when we sit in these seats and building technology that down the line it does have a big impact if we can help them.
Yeah, I have to imagine teachers are a very good target for you guys, given the fact that they have to be in school for a long time and salaries are relatively low. So I can imagine the debt management piece being particularly, salient for them. I want to ask you, I guess this is more a personal question. You mentioned your experience at Vestwell, and I'm kind of curious how your career has led up to this point in the sense that, like, how has it prepared you for the mandate that you have at Summer today?
Yeah, as I think about my career, even starting back at BlackRock, and how I've landed here at Summer, I think I go back to continuing to figure out how the impact that I can have, or the broader impact I can have. And when I made the leap from BlackRock to a smaller company, the reason why was not only because I wanted to be part of a startup in a smaller company, but really saw the way that technology was changing the game in terms of providing access. And I think
Mm.
that's always been kind of like my thread throughout is how are these companies changing access and making it easier, right? Like at Vestwell, what they do really well is they help companies just offer 401ks that employees will
Hmm.
actually use, and they make it really easy. Not to overuse the term the easy button, but it's really true, right? Like you have to have for all these like complex financial services items, if you don't make it easy, the person down the street, they're just not going to use it.
Right. You got to
And we
put the
know that
nudges in, all the nudges.
the
Yeah.
nudges, making things simple is a lot
Hmm.
harder than people think. And so for me, it was like, okay, so at Vestwell, it's how do we make retirement accessible? Because we all know the sooner you start saving, the compounding interest, the more you're going to have later. And it's a big problem that, look, we just need people to save more.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what led me to Summer was, okay, what is the impact that reducing student loan has? And to that story, and that's why I love these stories too. It reminds me of, kind of what are we doing day in, day out.
One of the things we've covered at Tearsheet is the preparedness or lack of preparedness of traditional financial institutions to address the needs of younger consumers. I'm kind of curious, given your purview and your experience, how you see that playing out. Are institutionally, whether it's big companies or smaller companies, are we getting better at serving the financial needs of younger customers?
I think we are. I think they're obviously like as we've in the past 10 years have really switched to more of a digital experience, specifically when it comes to investing in savings, like the rise of robo advisors in
Hmm.
2014, 2015 really woke up a lot of the big companies, right? Like Schwab, after they saw the rise of Betterment and Wealthfront and others, launched their own
Hmm.
robo advisor. And I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon because, one, again, it just makes it really easy for younger individuals to trade, to invest. I mean, I started an investment account for my two young boys, and now they're required every week to like review their investment account, see what they want to invest in, and we use Stockpile,
Hmm.
and it's
I've
really simple.
recommended that to a few people because it's so easy.
It's so
Yeah.
easy. Like literally the number of what you have, or your value invested, and then it shows, of course they're investing in like Disney and
Hmm.
Roblox and
The
those
brands. Yeah.
things, the brands, the Tesla. but it gives them like they're practicing, right? So they won't be scared of it because I think that's a lot of the barrier too is like, oh, I don't know this, or this is only accessible for those that have a lot of money, and that's not true. Like my kids put in $20 a week at most. I put it in for them, but they just get into that muscle memory, and I think that's important is like the practice of it.
Michelle, if it's okay, I'd like to switch gears and talk about NYC Fintech Women. I'm sure that's something close to your heart. What inspired you to found NYC Fintech Women, and kind of what gaps or needs did you see in the industry that prompted that?
Yeah, so I started NYC Fintech Women in, gosh, I want to say 2017. And this is
Why
when
does that feel so long ago?
it feels so long. I think it is.
Yeah.
Uh, it was, yeah, 2017. And the gap I saw was one, I was going to a ton of fintech events.
Hmm.
And there weren't a ton of women going to these fintech events at the
I know
time.
that problem
Or
well.
I was going
Yes.
to a ton of like women in tech events and having to really, do work to find, women in more traditional fintechs. And there was a couple different reasons why. One is I wanted to connect from a community perspective. And then I thought about like my personal career and whatnot. And really what inspired me to really start it was I had a really bad meeting with a ton of men. So sorry, men, but no knock on them. But it was one of those meetings, right, where it was, there's a little bit of mansplaining, there's a little bit of, the interrupting and all
Hmm.
that. And I went home that night and I went on meetup.com and I paid my $80 of fees, and Women in Fintech name was taken. So I went with NYC Fintech Women since I lived in New York at the time. And I set a date and I threw it out there in the universe and said, hey, on this date, who wants to meet me at a bar and just to build community? And 16 women showed up, including
Wow.
my founder, Sasha Pilch.
Hmm.
And it was a rainy night in New York. And you know what happens on a rainy night in New York? No one shows up.
Hmm.
So it was so inspiring to like just meet those 16, but it grew so exponentially fast. Within a couple months, we had our first sponsored event with a company called Trade It. They're not around anymore, but they hosted us in their office. And then we just started doing more and more and more. And before you knew it, hundreds of people were coming. We were doing, kind of panels at conferences. And so that kind of woke us up to be like, oh my gosh, there is a community to build here because we all benefit from being together. And so have put that in place. Now we can count over 15,000 folks, men, women, people globally, and we've expanded out. I've moved to the Bay Area for family reasons, and we're starting, we're doing a chapter here in San Francisco. We have Chicago. We have our first event in Miami coming up, and we've done events in other places. So really excited to continue the conversation. And we've one of my favorite things too is that we started inspiring fintech females. So every year we recognize 60 women in fintech, and we have a holiday celebration at the New York Stock Exchange every year to celebrate them. And it's so cool because they recipients will walk up the steps of the New York Stock Exchange, and then boom, their face is on top of all the trading stations.
Wow.
And can you imagine being like, someone who just started your startup, your fintech, and you're like, oh, I
Hmm.
gotta raise my seed round, I gotta raise my A, I'm tired, like this is hard. And then you can use this platform to really do that. And it's really cool. It's like it's goosebump moments for me, and I love it.
That sounds awesome. I guess I have a follow-on question is like what impact have you seen since you started this organization? I can say personally, like, it is bumping into, I bump into that problem when I'm recruiting for speakers for our conferences. It used to be that we had to work harder. So this is obviously just one person's perspective. Um, and it was very hard to find women, even if there obviously were women there that were capable speakers, but it had to be negotiated. What has changed since the time period that you described that you started in NYC Fintech Women is that organizations more readily put them forth now. That's what I've seen.
Yeah,
Have you seen something similar?
I think so. I think I think it's a good time in terms of like the rise of fintech over the past, five,
Hmm.
6 years. Also recognition that, we need to have more female voices. And, with everything that's happening in the world today, my hope is that that does not change. And it's really great to hear too of conferences like Finovate has a very specific metric that they want to hit when it comes to having female speakers. Whereas before we would, what Sasha and I used to do, we would look at these conferences and we'll go through like the conference list and then we'll reach out to them and be like, you don't have enough women. And here are like 10 people that you should have for these specific topics. So we would like proactively go after these
Very
conferences and tell
smart.
them.
Right.
And so I think there's definitely been a shift in that. And, I hope it continues.
What advice would you give to women? I guess you mentioned those, early stage female founders that are just moving into the industry today, based on your experiences.
I think for the biggest thing that I say is, I think this is not anything new, but in terms of really making sure you do thoughtful networking. And I think it continues to be not a struggle, but as things are obviously, people are definitely back in person and things, but it's a muscle that people need to flex all the time. But then you can get super distracted with networking, so you just got to make sure you're super intentional about it. And what I also, love to do is amplifying others. So as someone that is coming in, building out a very clear network of those that will support you, your personal board, but then making sure it's not necessarily a pay it back, but continuing the cycle of amplifying others. Because I think that will just pay dividends to you in the long run as well.
I think it breeds goodwill as well. Like I think there are people who are very naturally gifted at doing this, and I think, but it's also a learned skill, right? I mean, it's if somebody feels uncomfortable, they can be more thoughtful about it, put themselves out,
Yeah.
allocate a certain number of hours every week to focus on that type of networking.
Yeah. And the other thing I would add too is there's such a need now to build your brand, especially as platforms like LinkedIn. So it's no longer, I don't think it was ever the case of like just put your head down and do your work, but you really have to shout from the rooftops. And it's hard, like to your point, like some people just aren't comfortable with doing that. Either talking about themselves. And so like the first thing you do is talk about someone else because everyone loves that, right?
Right.
But there is an element of like, but you have to advocate for yourself. And I think, especially as like someone who's, if you're a founder, you're starting something new, as you're fundraising, VCs look at that, supporters look at that, investors look at that. And so it is really, you have to build your brand. And that's just the world that we live in now.
I'm always surprised about this at our conferences. One of the roles I play when we put together Tearsheet conferences, I'm kind of running around, and we do small, intimate conferences. So, anywhere between 30 and 70 people. And I'm running around trying to connect people because I feel like that's one of the roles that I play as conference organizer and editor. And I'm always surprised they're very senior executives in some of the biggest financial services firms in the world. And when I speak to them one-on-one, they're like, can you help me introduce, I want to meet that person, but I feel socially awkward. It's like these are senior executives, but it doesn't come easy to them. And I guess that's another piece. You can rely upon the goodness of others to help to make those, triangulate your way into people. I think people are happy to pay it forward, as you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I get that sometimes too, and I'm like, oh, can I just go up and meet someone? Is that I think everyone has that little bit of social awkwardness in them.
I remember in the early stage of my career, I was doing biz dev for Seeking Alpha, and there was a senior executive at Microsoft who I just been trying to like get connected to for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. I don't know what it was, but it was he was clearly not interested in meeting me. And I was at a conference, and I cornered him in the bathroom. And I always feel like that was the pinnacle of my biz dev experience. Was like I wasn't going to let him leave before I got a chance to speak to him. I don't know if I should be proud of that or ashamed of that, but that was the case. We're getting near the end of our conversation. I'm curious, looking ahead, like what gets you most excited about financial services, whether it's in student debt or it's in more general as well. I'm just curious what you're looking at.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'm really excited about. I think one, I'm excited to see how people are going to rise up with the kind of pullback on DEI, right? Like, so there's definitely a pullback on DEI. Like, that's just a fact. We know that. So what are people going to do to help continue to support it? And so we do all need to take a more concerted effort to figure out how do we continue the goals of DEI without calling it DEI?
Right.
It's funny.
That's
I was
why
at
the first day it gets rebranded.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was at a conference recently, and the folks went around the table and was like, "What are your your top three challenges?" And you could see this gentleman like he was like, "I have all these DEI programs, but I can't call them DEI anymore. So how do I think about these programs, but not under the lens of DEI because I really want to keep them going." So I think I'm really excited to see how that's going to transform over the next year. I'm excited crypto's back.
Me too.
I'm
Yeah.
a big proponent of digital assets in general. And it's funny because I was just did a panel talking about wealth strategies. And I'm like, look, you have big pension funds who have some type of allocation to crypto because it is, your diversifying portfolio. It's an uncorrelated asset class.
You had the ETFs this past year that gave them
Yeah,
easier opportunity for access. Yeah.
I think that's going to start in the next year to see more adoption, mainstream adoption of crypto in general. I think there's still like an education gap and people are still scared just because of it's the volatility of it. But I'm excited to have it back and play. I think people were a little bit standoffish for a while. And I'm really excited to see kind of how I think generally fintechs are going to fundraise and see what happens in that fundraising landscape. It's definitely, obviously it's been different and tough for the past couple of years. And what I really want to see too is the continued intentional focus to support women in fintech and female founders. Our the stat of under 2% of funding actually goes to companies with only female founders, and that's pretty dismal stat. So hopefully as things pick up over the next year, that will increase. Rising tide raises all boats, so hopefully that'll happen as well.
Michelle, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for joining us on the Tearsheet podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was a fun conversation.